In a galaxy where technology defines civilization and plasma cannons determine dominance, the most feared species carry weapons that can vaporize planets.
The Zephyrians wield energy swords that cut through starship hulls. The Krillian Empire deploys gravity bombs that collapse entire moons.
The robotic Nexus Collective fires antimatter streams across light years. Then, there are the humans.
When the Galactic Academy's most prestigious military science professor challenged her advanced weapons technology class to demonstrate the pinnacle of destructive innovation, every species rushed to present their most sophisticated armaments. Plasma rifles hummed, energy shields flickered, and quantum disruptors charged with lethal precision. The human exchange student, Marcus Chan, simply walked to the supply closet. He emerged with a wooden ruler, some string, and a pencil. What happened next would redefine the galaxy's understanding of warfare, ingenuity, and the terrifying simplicity of human lethality. Because sometimes, the most primitive weapon in the right hands is deadlier than all the advanced technology in the universe. This is the story of how a bow and arrow brought the Galactic Federation to its knees, and why humans became the most recruited and most feared species in known space. The morning artificial sunlight filtered through the transparent aluminum walls of Classroom Zeta 7 at the Galactic Military Academy, casting long shadows across the polished metallic floor. Professor XYTHRA stood at the front of the room, her forearms gracefully manipulating a holographic display that showed the evolution of weapons technology across the known galaxy. Her scales shimmered with the subtle color changes that indicated deep concentration among her species, the reptilian Sorok. Marcus Chan sat in the back row, his human frame looking almost comically small among his classmates. To his left towered Gornak, a massive Krillian whose rocky exterior made him look like a living mountain. The creature's three eyes focused intently on the professor, occasionally blinking in sequence as he processed information through his silicon-based neural pathways. To Marcus's right, Veltar's ethereal blue form flickered slightly as the energy being maintained its physical manifestation. The Zephyrian's natural state was pure energy, and holding a solid form for extended periods required constant concentration.
Behind them, the insectoid Hivari student called ZZKTH clicked and chittered softly, its compound eyes tracking multiple data streams simultaneously.
The creature's 6 arms moved in perfect coordination as it took notes on 3 different devices, its efficiency a marvel even by galactic standards. Near the front, a Nexus Collective android sat perfectly still, its chrome surface reflecting the classroom lights in geometric patterns. The machine designated NC-4472 processed information at quantum speeds, making organic note-taking unnecessary. Professor XYHRA's lecture had covered the standard curriculum, energy weapons, projectile systems, biological warfare, and the exotic weapons that defied conventional physics. Her species had developed some of the most sophisticated plasma-based weaponry in the galaxy, capable of maintaining coherent energy streams across vast distances. She spoke with the authority of someone who had witnessed the devastation these weapons could unleash. Now, the professor said, her voice carrying the natural authority of someone who had commanded starship weapons systems during the border wars, we come to the practical portion of today's lesson. Each of you represents a different species, a different approach to warfare and technology. I want you to demonstrate what you consider the pinnacle of your people's weapons technology. The classroom erupted in excited chatter as students began discussing among themselves. This was why they attended the academy, the chance to share knowledge across species barriers, to learn from civilizations that had developed along completely different technological paths. Gornak was the first to volunteer. The Krillian lumbered to the front of the classroom, his massive frame causing the floor to vibrate slightly with each step. From his equipment pack, he withdrew what appeared to be a simple gray sphere about the size of a human fist. However, Marcus could see the complex mathematical symbols etched into its surface, glowing faintly with internal energy. "This is a gravity compression device," Gornak rumbled, his voice like stones grinding together.
"My people call it the Star Crusher. When activated, it creates a localized gravitational field with approximately 1/10 the pull of a neutron star. The effective range is 50 meters, and the duration is 30 seconds. Professor XYTHRA nodded approvingly as she activated the classroom's safety protocols. Force fields hummed to life around the demonstration area, and gravity dampeners engaged to prevent any accidental activation from affecting the students. "Impressive," she said. "The Krillian mastery of gravitational manipulation is legendary throughout the galaxy." "Next."
Veltar flowed to the front, his energy form taking on a more solid appearance as he concentrated. From within his being, he produced what looked like a sword made of pure light. The blade hummed with barely contained power, and Marcus could feel the heat radiating from it even from the back of the room. The photon blade, Veltar announced, his voice carrying harmonics that suggested communication across multiple dimensional frequencies. This weapon can cut through any known material by disrupting molecular bonds at the quantum level. The blade is composed of coherent photons held in a stable matrix. It can extend up to 3 meters and maintains its cutting edge indefinitely. The Zephyrian demonstrated by slicing through a block of condensed matter that the professor materialized for the test. The blade passed through it as if it were cutting through empty space, leaving perfectly smooth surfaces that glowed briefly from the residual energy. ZZKTH scuttled forward next, its movement creating an oddly hypnotic pattern as its 6 legs coordinated in perfect rhythm. The Hibari's natural hive-mind connection meant that every member of its species shared accumulated knowledge, making them formidable opponents in any conflict.
Bioweapon designation, Flesh Dissolver Mark 7, ZZKTH announced in the clicking, chittering language that the universal translators rendered into standard galactic.
From a sealed container, it produced what appeared to be a small, innocent-looking seed.
This organism, when exposed to atmospheric conditions, releases spores that break down carbon-based lifeforms at the cellular level. Effective range, 15 kilometers. Time to full effect, 3 minutes. Lethality rate, 99.7% against all tested organic species. Even with the safety protocols active, several students instinctively moved away from the demonstration area. The Hibari's biological weapons were renowned for their effectiveness and their terrifying specificity.
NC-4472 approached the front with the precise, measured movements characteristic of its kind.
The android's optical sensors glowed briefly as it accessed its weapons database.
Antimatter pulse rifle, the machine stated in the flat, emotionless tone typical of the Nexus Collective. Fires concentrated antimatter packets contained within magnetic bottles. Upon impact, the containment field collapses, resulting in matter-antimatter annihilation. Effective range, 200 kilometers in atmosphere, unlimited in vacuum.
Destructive yield, equivalent to fusion devices. The android produced a sleek weapon that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it.
Even inactive, the device radiated an aura of barely contained destruction that made the air itself seem to hum with potential energy. Professor XYTHera surveyed her students with satisfaction.
Excellent demonstrations, all.
These represent some of the finest weapons technology our respective civilizations have produced. Gravity manipulation, coherent energy, biological warfare, antimatter annihilation, the pinnacles of scientific achievement apply to the art of war. She paused, her reptilian gaze sweeping across the room until it settled on Marcus in the back row.
Mr. Chen, you have been unusually quiet. Human weapons technology is something of a mystery to many of us.
Your species has only recently achieved interstellar flight, yet you've already earned a reputation as formidable warriors.
Would you care to demonstrate something from your military arsenal?
All eyes turned to Marcus, and he felt the familiar sensation of being studied like a specimen. Humans were still relatively new to galactic society, having made first contact only 50 years ago. Their technology was considered primitive by galactic standards, yet human mercenaries were increasingly sought after for high-risk military operations.
This contradiction puzzled many species.
Marcus stood slowly, his movement deliberate and unhurried.
I'd be happy to, Professor. But I should mention that I didn't bring any weapons with me to class.
This statement caused a ripple of confusion among his classmates.
Gornak's 3 eyes blinked in sequence as he processed this information. No weapons? Then, how can you demonstrate?
Well, Marcus said, walking toward the front of the classroom, that depends on your definition of weapons. He paused at the supply closet that every academy classroom contained, standard equipment for hands-on learning exercises.
Professor, may I borrow a few items from the classroom supplies?
Professor XYTHera's scales shifted to a pattern that indicated curious interest.
Of course, Mr. Chen. Please, proceed.
Marcus opened the supply closet and examined its contents with the careful attention of someone who had learned to see potential in ordinary objects. The closet contained the usual array of educational materials, measurement devices, writing implements, various structural materials for engineering demonstrations, and basic tools for hands-on learning. He selected a wooden meter stick, the kind used for basic measurement lessons. The wood was native to the Sorok homeworld, strong, flexible, and with a natural grain that provided structural integrity. Next, he found a ball of synthetic string, typically used for geometric demonstrations. Finally, he chose a simple stylus, used for writing on digital tablets. The classroom fell silent as Marcus returned to the demonstration area with these mundane objects. His classmates exchanged glances of confusion and, in some cases, concern. Had the human finally succumbed to the psychological pressure of being the only member of his species at the academy? Mr. Chen, Professor XYTHRS said carefully, those appear to be common classroom supplies. Are you certain you understand the nature of this exercise? Marcus smiled, and several students noted that the expression didn't quite reach his eyes. There was something in that smile that suggested depths they hadn't previously recognized. Professor, with respect, I think the question is whether you understand the nature of weapons. He placed the meter stick on the demonstration table and examined it carefully, running his fingers along its length to check for imperfections. The wood was sound, with no cracks or weak points. Perfect. You see, Marcus continued as he worked, my classmates have shown you examples of advanced technology, sophisticated devices that require industrial infrastructure, rare materials, and years of development. They're impressive achievements, no question about that. He began to carefully cut notches in each end of the meter stick using the edge of the stylus. His movements were precise, economical, and spoke of practice. The other students watched with growing fascination as the seemingly random actions began to take on a familiar pattern. But, there's something to be said for simplicity, Marcus went on. For weapons that can be made anywhere, from anything, by anyone who understands the principles involved. He tested the flexibility of the meter stick, bending it carefully to check its spring and resilience. Satisfied, he began to string it, tying the synthetic cord to one notched end and, then, bending the stick to attach the other end. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. The classroom supply had become something else entirely. Veltar was the first to recognize what they were witnessing. Is that a bow? The energy being's form flickered with surprise. A primitive projectile weapon? Primitive? Marcus tested the draw of his improvised bow, adjusting the string tension. I suppose that depends on your perspective. This design has been used by humans for approximately 65,000 years. It's been refined, perfected, and adapted to countless different situations and materials. From his pocket, he produced a small object that made several students gasp in recognition. It was a standard Academy security pin, the kind every student wore to identify themselves and access various facilities. However, Marcus had modified it, straightening the pin portion and using his stylus to create a sharp point. The beauty of human weapons isn't in their complexity, Marcus continued, fitting his makeshift arrow to the bowstring. It's in their adaptability. A bow can be made from any flexible material. Wood, metal, composite fibers, even bone if necessary. The arrows can be fashioned from anything straight and relatively rigid. In survival situations, humans have made effective bows from ski equipment, car parts, and, yes, classroom supplies. Professor XYTHR's scales had shifted to a pattern indicating deep interest mixed with concern. Mr. Chen, while this is certainly educational, I'm not sure this demonstration quite matches the sophistication of Marcus drew the bow. The transformation was immediate and startling. The relaxed, slightly awkward human student disappeared, replaced by something that radiated focused lethality. His stance shifted into perfect alignment, his breathing slowed and deepened, and his eyes took on an intensity that made several students instinctively step backward. This weapon, Marcus said, his voice now carrying a quiet authority that commanded absolute attention, has an effective range of approximately 150 meters in Earth gravity. With proper arrows, it can penetrate most personal armor systems. It's completely silent, leaves no energy signature, and requires no power source beyond the operator's muscles. He held the draw for a moment, demonstrating the rock-steady control that spoke of years of training. It can be used for hunting, warfare, or precision targeting. In skilled hands, it's accurate enough to hit a target the size of a coin at 50 meters. And, perhaps most importantly, he relaxed the draw slightly but maintained his ready position. It can be manufactured by a single person, with hand tools, in less than an hour. The silence in the classroom was profound. Even NC 4472's optical sensors had focused entirely on Marcus, the android's processing power devoted to analyzing this unexpected demonstration. But, Professor, Marcus continued, you asked for a demonstration of human weapons technology. This isn't it. The statement hung in the air like a challenge.
This is just a tool, Marcus said. A delivery system. Human weapons technology isn't about the device, it's about the operator. It's about taking whatever is available and finding a way to make it effective. It's about adaptation, improvisation, and the refusal to accept that a situation is impossible. He finally lowered the bow, but his posture remained alert, ready. Every species in this room has developed weapons that are superior to anything humans can build. Your technology is more advanced, your materials science more sophisticated, your understanding of physics more complete. But, when the shooting starts, guess which species everyone wants on their side? The question was rhetorical, but several students found themselves nodding unconsciously. Human mercenaries were indeed in high demand throughout the galaxy, despite their technological limitations. The Krillian gravity weapon is devastating, Marcus acknowledged, nodding toward Gornak, but it requires rare materials and complex manufacturing. If the Krillian Empire's industrial base were destroyed, how long would it take to rebuild the capacity to make more? Gornak's stone features showed the first sign of uncertainty. Perhaps several years. The manufacturing process is indeed complex. The Zephyrian photon blade is elegant and incredibly effective, Marcus continued, but what happens when Veltar is separated from the energy sources that maintain his physical form? Can he still manifest the weapon? Veltar's form flickered more noticeably as he considered this. In environments with limited energy, manifestation becomes difficult. Marcus turned to address the entire class. The Hivari bioweapon is terrifyingly effective, but it requires specific atmospheric conditions and has a limited shelf life. The Nexus antimatter rifle is incredibly powerful, but it depends on a sophisticated technological base for ammunition and maintenance. He held up his improvised bow. This weapon was made from classroom supplies in 5 minutes. The principles behind it can be taught to a child. It can be manufactured on any planet with plant life or basic materials. And, in the hands of someone who truly understands its use, it's deadly enough to change the course of a battle. Professor XYTHRA studied the human with new eyes. Her scales had shifted to a pattern she hadn't displayed in years, one that among her people indicated recognition of a dangerous predator. Mr. Chen, this is certainly an interesting perspective on weapons technology. But surely you're not suggesting that primitive projectile weapons are superior to modern military equipment? Marcus smiled again, and this time the expression was warmer, more genuine. Not superior, Professor. Complementary. See, that's what makes human weapons technology unique. We never abandoned the old ways when we developed new ones. A human soldier carries a plasma rifle, yes, but also a knife. He learns to use advanced targeting systems, but he also learns to throw rocks accurately. He trains with powered armor and energy shields, but he also learns to fight with his bare hands. He gestured toward his classmates with the bow. Each of your species developed along a particular technological path. You specialized, and you became incredibly good at what you do. Humans, we generalized. We kept every weapon, every technique, every dirty trick we ever learned. And we taught ourselves to see weapons where others see ordinary objects. To demonstrate, Marcus walked to one of the empty desks. He picked up a simple stylus identical to the one he'd used to make his arrow point. Projectile weapon, he said, pantomiming a throwing motion. He picked up a datapad. Shield or bludgeon, depending on the situation. He lifted one of the desk's detached legs. Lever, club, spear shaft, or prying tool. The demonstration was simple, but its implications were profound. Every student in the room began looking around the classroom with new eyes, suddenly seeing potential weapons and objects they'd considered completely mundane. This is what human weapons technology really is, Marcus concluded. It's not about building the biggest gun or the most sophisticated targeting system. It's about the refusal to ever be truly disarmed. It's about the ability to look at any situation, any environment, any collection of objects, and find a way to fight. He carefully unstrung his bow and returned the meter stick to its original position on the demonstration table. The galaxy sees humans as primitive because our starships aren't as fast, our computers aren't as powerful, and our energy weapons aren't as sophisticated. But that misses the point entirely. Professor XYTHRA found herself leaning forward, genuinely intrigued despite her concerns about where this demonstration was leading. And what is the point, Mr. Chen? The point, Professor, is that human weapons technology isn't about the weapons. It's about the humans. Marcus looked around the classroom, meeting the eyes of each of his classmates in turn. Gornak, your people are incredibly strong and your technology is impressive. But what happens when a human faces a Krillian in an environment where gravity weapons don't work? Veltar, Zephyrians are masters of energy manipulation, but what happens when you meet a human in a null energy field? ZZKTH, the Hivari hive mind is formidable, but how do you deal with an opponent who thinks as an individual, who can be unpredictable in ways your collective consciousness can't anticipate? The silence that followed was thoughtful rather than uncomfortable. Each student was considering the implications of what they'd just heard. And, NC 4472, Marcus addressed the android directly, your processing power and combat algorithms are incredibly sophisticated. But, what do you do when faced with an opponent who doesn't follow logical patterns? Who makes decisions based on intuition, emotion, and experience rather than pure calculation? The android's optical sensors focused on Marcus with mechanical precision. Explain. A human will charge a superior force if they believe it's the right thing to do. A human will sacrifice tactical advantage for ethical considerations. A human will ignore their own survival instincts to protect others. How do you calculate for that? How do you prepare for an opponent who will deliberately make the wrong choice because they think it's morally correct? NC 4472's processing indicators flickered rapidly as it attempted to find algorithms to account for such behavior. The effort was clearly taxing its systems in ways that pure tactical calculation never did. Professor XYTHera watched this exchange with growing fascination. In 5 minutes, the human student had managed to challenge every assumption her other students had about the nature of warfare and weapons technology. Mr. Chen, she said finally, this has been illuminating. But, I must ask, are you suggesting that human weapons technology is superior to what we've seen today? Marcus shook his head. Not superior, Professor. Just different. Every species here could build a bow and arrow. Every species here could learn the principles I've demonstrated. But they don't, because they've moved beyond such things. They've specialized, focused on their strengths, developed incredible capabilities along specific paths. He picked up his improvised arrow and examined the sharp point he'd created. Humans did something different. We kept everything. We learned to use whatever worked, regardless of where it came from or how primitive it seemed. We combined ancient techniques with modern technology. We never forgot that sometimes, the simple solution is the best solution. The human student looked around the classroom one more time, noting the expressions of curiosity, concern, and calculation on the faces of his classmates. That's why human mercenaries are in demand throughout the galaxy, despite our technological limitations. It's not because we're stronger or smarter or more advanced. It's because we're adaptable. We're unpredictable. And we absolutely refuse to give up, no matter how bad things get. Marcus returned to his seat, leaving the improvised bow on the demonstration table. The simple weapon, made from nothing but classroom supplies, seemed to dominate the space despite its humble materials. Questions? Professor XYTHera asked, though her own mind was racing with implications she hadn't considered before this demonstration. Gornak raised one massive hand. Human Chen, this adaptability you speak of, is this common among your people? Every human child learns these principles, Marcus replied. We call it making do or improvising. It's so fundamental to how we think that we don't even notice we're doing it most of the time. Veltar's energy form flickered with what might have been concern. And this flexibility extends to combat situations? Especially to combat situations. A human fighter pilot whose ship is damaged will find ways to use the damage as a weapon. A human soldier who runs out of ammunition will pick up rocks. A human engineer will turn life support systems into bombs if that's what the situation requires. The implications hung in the air like an unspoken challenge. Every species in the room had encountered humans in various contexts, but they were beginning to realize they might not have understood what they were dealing with. As the class period drew to a close, Professor XYTHera found herself reconsidering everything she thought she knew about weapons technology, military doctrine, and the strange species that had recently joined galactic civilization. The humans, it seemed, were going to be far more interesting than anyone had anticipated.
News traveled fast through the Galactic Military Academy's interconnected network of students, faculty, and administrative staff.
By evening mealtime, every dining hall conversation seemed to center around the humans' demonstration in Professor XYTHR's weapons technology class.
The story grew with each telling, as stories do, but the core remained consistent. The human had built a functional weapon from classroom supplies and challenged fundamental assumptions about military technology. Marcus found himself the center of attention in ways that made him deeply uncomfortable. As he carried his meal tray through the main dining facility, a vast space designed to accommodate the dietary needs of dozens of different species, conversation stopped when he passed. Students pointed, whispered, and stared with the intensity typically reserved for exotic creatures in a zoo. The dining hall itself was a marvel of engineering, with environmental zones tailored to different species' requirements. The Sorok section featured elevated temperature and humidity controls that made their scales gleam with health.
The Zephyrian area flickered with energy fields that allowed the beings to feed directly on electrical current.
The Krillian zone reinforced the floor to handle their massive weight and provided the mineral supplements their silicon-based biology required. Marcus headed for the human section, a modest area with standard atmospheric controls and conventional food preparation facilities. As the only human at the academy, he usually ate alone, which had never bothered him before. Tonight, however, he found his solitary table occupied by an unexpected visitor.
Admiral Thekvar rose as Marcus approached, the Nexus Collective's senior representative at the academy, standing with the precise movements characteristic of their kind.
The Admiral's chrome chassis reflected the dining hall's lights in complex patterns, and status indicators along their arm displayed a steady blue that indicated formal greeting protocols. "Student Chen," the Admiral said, their voice carrying the flat, emotionless tone typical of their species. "I request permission to join you for nutritional intake period."
Marcus blinked in surprise.
In his 2 years at the academy, he'd never had a faculty member, let alone an admiral, request to join him for a meal.
"Of course, Admiral. Please, sit."
The androids settled into the chair with mechanical precision, their optical sensors focusing on Marcus with unwavering attention.
"I have reviewed the incident reports from Professor XYTHR's class. The demonstration you provided has generated significant discussion among faculty and students."
"So I've noticed," Marcus replied, glancing around at the other students who were still watching their table with obvious curiosity. "I hope I didn't cause any problems for the professor."
"On the contrary," Admiral Thekvar responded.
"Professor XYTHR's preliminary report suggests that your demonstration may have identified gaps in our current military doctrine that require examination."
The android paused, status lights flickering as they processed additional information. "I am here to discuss implications."
Marcus set down his fork, recognizing that this had become an official conversation rather than a casual meal.
"What kind of implications, Admiral?"
The Nexus Collective has spent considerable computational resources analyzing human military history since your species achieved interstellar capability. Our analysis focused primarily on technological development, industrial capacity, and organizational structure. Your demonstration suggests our analysis may have been incomplete.
The Admiral's admission was startling. The Nexus Collective was renowned throughout the galaxy for their analytical capabilities.
Their prediction algorithms had successfully forecasted the outcomes of dozens of conflicts, and their strategic assessments were considered the gold standard for military planning.
"What specific aspects did we overlook?"
Admiral Thekvar asked, their optical sensors maintaining perfect focus on Marcus despite the conversations and movement happening throughout the dining hall.
Marcus considered his response carefully. "Admiral, with respect, I think the problem is that you analyzed human military history as if we were any other species.
You looked at our weapons development, our organizational structures, our tactical doctrines. All of that is important, but it misses the core of how humans actually fight."
"Explain."
"Every other species in the galaxy fights with their strengths," Marcus said. Krillians use overwhelming force and superior material science. Zephyrians leverage their energy manipulation abilities.
Sorok employ advanced plasma technology and sophisticated targeting systems. Each species developed military doctrine around what they do best.
He gestured toward the various sections of the dining hall, where students from different species clustered in their respective environmental zones.
"Humans fight differently. We don't just use our strengths, we find ways to make our weaknesses irrelevant." Admiral Thekvar's status indicators shifted to a pattern indicating intensive processing. Provide examples. Take the Battle of Thermopylae from ancient Earth history. 300 Spartan warriors held off an army of hundreds of thousands by choosing terrain that negated the enemy's numerical advantage. Or the Tet Offensive during the Vietnam War, where technologically inferior forces achieved strategic victory by changing the nature of the conflict itself. Marcus paused to take a bite of his meal, noting that Admiral Thekvar waited patiently despite having no need for nutritional intake. More recently, look at the Proxima border incident. A single human merchant vessel disabled 2 Ravager clan warships by using its cargo of industrial chemicals as improvised weapons. That incident was classified as an anomaly in our analysis, the Admiral noted. That's exactly my point, Marcus replied. To you, it was an anomaly. To us, it was Tuesday. Humans don't have one way of fighting, we have whatever way works in the current situation. We adapt, improvise, and overcome. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Gornak, whose massive frame cast a shadow over their table. The Krillian's 3 eyes focused on Marcus with an expression that might have been curiosity. May I join this discussion? Gornak rumbled, his stone-like voice carrying easily over the dining hall's ambient noise. I have been considering your demonstration, Human Shen, and I find myself confused. Admiral Thekvar gestured to an empty chair, which groaned slightly under Gornak's weight as he settled in. The Krillian's presence drew even more attention from nearby students, creating an impromptu gathering that was beginning to disrupt the normal dinner routine. What confuses you? Marcus asked. Your bow weapon, Gornak said slowly, his words measured and deliberate in the way typical of his species. I understand the mechanical principles. String provides elastic energy, projectile transfers kinetic force, simple physics. But I do not understand the strategy. The Krillian leaned forward, his massive hands folding together on the table surface. Krillian doctrine emphasizes overwhelming superiority. We develop weapons that cannot be countered, defenses that cannot be breached. We win through absolute advantage. Your bow, it has no absolute advantage. Any species could build better version with superior materials, more precise manufacturing, advanced targeting systems. Why choose weapon that others can improve upon? It was a thoughtful question that cut to the heart of different philosophical approaches to warfare. Marcus found himself respecting the Krillian's analytical mind, despite the intimidating appearance. Because you're thinking about it wrong, Marcus replied. You're assuming the point is to build the best possible bow. But that's not the point at all. Then, what is the point? Admiral Thekvar interjected, their optical sensors adjusting focus to maintain perfect attention on Marcus despite the growing crowd of students who were beginning to gather around their table. The point is to never be without options, Marcus explained. Yes, you could build a better bow with advanced materials and precision manufacturing. But what happens when you don't have access to those things? What happens when your supply lines are cut, your manufacturing base is destroyed, or you're stranded on a primitive planet with nothing but local resources? He gestured toward the improvised weapon he demonstrated earlier, which had somehow become the subject of intense discussion throughout the academy. A Krillian warrior without access to gravity manipulation technology is severely handicapped. A Zephyrian separated from energy sources loses most of their combat effectiveness. But a human with access to any flexible material and any straight stick can still be dangerous. Veltar materialized at their table, his energy form stabilizing as he focused his attention on the conversation. But surely this is inefficient? Why maintain inferior capabilities when superior alternatives exist? Because superior depends entirely on the situation, Marcus replied. In open space combat with unlimited resources and proper support, your photon blade is absolutely superior to anything I could improvise. But, in a stealth situation where energy signatures would give you away, my bow might be the better choice. In a resource-limited environment where maintaining your physical form is difficult, primitive weapons might be the only option. The gathering had grown to include nearly a dozen students from various species, creating an informal seminar in the middle of the dining hall. Marcus noticed that several faculty members had also begun to drift over, including Professor XYTHera herself, who observed the discussion with her characteristic reptilian attention to detail. ZZKTH scuttled into the group, its 6 legs creating a clicking rhythm against the floor. Human Shen, the Hivari announced in its translated voice, I have consulted with the collective consciousness. We find your demonstration disturbing. The statement caused a ripple of tension around the table. The HFY weren't easily disturbed, and their collective intelligence gave their concerns particular weight. Disturbing how? Marcus asked carefully. The collective has analyzed human military history through the lens of your demonstration, ZZKTH explained. We have identified pattern that was not previously recognized. Humans do not simply adapt existing weapons, you weaponize everything. Environment, psychology, logistics, even your own weaknesses become tools of warfare. Several students exchanged glances, beginning to understand the implications of what the HFY collective had discovered. Elaborate, Admiral Thekvar requested, their processing indicators showing increased activity. Example, human conflict designated World War II, ZZKTH clicked. Analysis shows humans weaponized industrial capacity, turning automobile factories into aircraft production. Humans weaponized geography, using harsh winters as allies against invading forces. Humans weaponized information, creating deliberate deceptions that misdirected enemy strategy. The HFY's compound eyes shifted to focus directly on Marcus. Most disturbing, humans weaponized their own suffering. Deliberate sacrifice of lives and resources to achieve strategic advantage. The collective finds this incomprehensible. A profound silence settled over the gathering. The concept of deliberately choosing to suffer losses for strategic gain was alien to most galactic species, who generally fought to minimize their own casualties while maximizing the enemy's. You find it incomprehensible, Marcus said quietly, but effective. Disturbingly effective, ZZKTH confirmed. Human military history shows consistent pattern of victory against superior forces through weaponization of circumstances that other species would consider disadvantageous. Professor XYTHera moved closer to the group, her scales displaying patterns that indicated deep analytical thought. Mr. Chen, the HFY raise an important point. This philosophy of warfare, this willingness to weaponize anything and everything, has significant implications for galactic security. The professor's statement brought the conversation into sharp focus. They weren't just discussing academic theory anymore, they were exploring the practical implications of human military doctrine in a galaxy where humans were increasingly involved in conflicts as mercenaries, advisors, and allies. What kind of implications? Asked a voice from the edge of the gathering. Marcus turned to see that the crowd had grown to include students from nearly every species represented at the academy, creating an impromptu forum that was drawing attention from across the dining hall. Admiral Thekvar's status indicators shifted to a pattern indicating security level analysis. The implications are significant. Current galactic military doctrine assumes predictable behavior patterns based on species capabilities and technological preferences. If humans consistently operate outside these parameters, existing strategic models may be inadequate. Consider, the Admiral continued, a scenario where human forces are defending a position against superior enemy forces. Standard doctrine would predict retreat when the position becomes untenable. But, if humans might instead weaponize their own defensive position, perhaps by turning it into a trap or using its destruction as part of a larger strategy, then, enemy calculations become unreliable. Gornak's three eyes blinked in sequence as he processed this concept. This explains why human mercenaries command premium rates despite inferior technology. Not because they fight better, but because they fight differently. Unpredictably differently, Veltar added, his energy form flickering with what might have been concern. Marcus looked around at the faces, biological and mechanical, staring at him with varying expressions of curiosity, concern, and calculation. He was beginning to understand that his simple classroom demonstration had opened a much larger conversation about the nature of human military thinking and its implications for galactic security. You're all making this more complicated than it needs to be, Marcus said finally. Yes, humans fight differently than other species. Yes, we weaponize things that others might not consider weapons. But, we're not some kind of mysterious, unpredictable force. Our thinking follows logical patterns, they're just different patterns than what you're used to. Explain these patterns, Professor XYTHera requested, settling into teaching mode despite the informal setting. Marcus considered how to explain concepts that were so fundamental to human thinking that most humans never consciously analyzed them. Okay, here's the basic principle. Humans assume that any conflict can be won if you're willing to pay the price and think creatively enough. We don't accept the idea that a situation is hopeless, we look for ways to change the rules of the game itself. He gestured toward his classmates. Each of your species has incredible capabilities, but you also have doctrinal assumptions about how those capabilities should be used. Humans, we don't really have doctrine in that sense. We have principles, guidelines, historical examples, but not rigid rules about the right way to fight. This creates chaos in strategic planning, Admiral Thekvar observed. For our enemies, yes, Marcus agreed. But it also means we can adapt to any situation. When we face a superior force, we look for ways to avoid direct confrontation. When we face inferior forces, we might still avoid direct confrontation if there's a more efficient approach. When we face equal forces, we look for ways to gain advantage through superior preparation, better intelligence, or more creative thinking. ZZKTH clicked pensively. The collective asks, what happens when humans face other humans? If both sides employ this adaptive philosophy? The question was perceptive and touched on one of the darker aspects of human military history. Marcus took a long breath before answering. When humans fight other humans, wars tend to be extremely destructive and extremely innovative. We push each other to develop new technologies, new tactics, new strategies. Each side tries to find advantages that the other hasn't considered yet. The results can be intense. Define intense, Admiral Thekvar requested. World War I saw the development of chemical weapons, aircraft combat, submarine warfare, and tactics that resulted in millions of casualties. World War II brought radar, rockets, nuclear weapons, and code-breaking operations. Each conflict pushed technology and tactics beyond what anyone thought possible. The gathering fell silent again as they contemplated the implications. A species that pushed itself to such extremes when fighting internally might be capable of even more when facing external threats. But, Marcus continued, those same conflicts also demonstrated something else about humans: we're capable of setting aside those differences when faced with common threats. Former enemies become allies when the situation requires it. We're pragmatic about cooperation when it serves our interests. Professor XYTHR's scale shifted to a pattern indicating synthesis of complex information. So human military doctrine is simultaneously competitive and cooperative, adaptive and traditional, predictable and chaotic? Welcome to humanity, Marcus replied with a slight smile. We're walking contradictions who somehow make it work. The conversation was interrupted by a soft chime that indicated the end of the dinner period. Students began to disperse, returning meal trays and heading to evening study sessions or recreational activities. However, the core group around Marcus's table remained, clearly reluctant to end a discussion that was revealing fundamental insights about one of the galaxy's newest and most mysterious species. Admiral Thekvar stood with mechanical precision. Student Chen, this conversation has provided valuable data for strategic analysis. However, it has also raised questions that require further investigation. Would you be willing to participate in additional discussions with faculty and military advisors? Marcus felt a mixture of pride and apprehension. Of course, Admiral. Though I should mention that I'm just one human. My perspective might not represent all of human military thinking. That raises another interesting question, Professor XYTHRA observed. How much variation exists within human military doctrine? Do all humans share these adaptive philosophies, or are there distinct schools of thought? Both, Marcus replied. The basic principles are pretty universal among human military forces, but the applications vary enormously. American military doctrine is different from Russian, which is different from Chinese, which is different from any number of smaller nations. Each developed under different historical pressures and geographical constraints. Gornak's massive frame shifted as he considered this information. Multiple doctrines within single species? This is unprecedented in galactic military history. Is it problematic? Veltar asked, his energy form flickering with curiosity. Marcus shrugged. Sometimes. Human military forces have fought each other plenty of times. But it's also been beneficial. The diversity of approaches means that humans have explored a much wider range of military possibilities than any single doctrine might have produced. As the group finally began to break up, students heading to their respective quarters for the evening, Marcus found himself both energized and exhausted by the conversation. What had started as a simple demonstration in weapons class had evolved into a complex discussion about the nature of human civilization and its implications for the broader galaxy. Walking back to his dormitory through the academy's quiet corridors, Marcus reflected on the day's events.
He'd always known that humans were different from other galactic species, but he was beginning to understand that the differences might be more profound than anyone had realized. The question now was what those differences would mean for humanity's future among the stars. As more human mercenaries found employment throughout the galaxy, as human advisors became embedded with alien military forces, and as human thinking influenced galactic military doctrine, the ripple effects could be enormous. Marcus reached his quarters and settled in for an evening of study, but found his mind wandering to larger questions about humanity's role in galactic civilization. Tomorrow would bring new classes, new discussions, and new opportunities to explore these concepts. He had no idea that his simple bow and arrow demonstration would soon reach the highest levels of galactic government, or that decisions made in distant star systems would bring the galaxy's attention to humanity in ways that no human had anticipated. The conversation in the dining hall had been just the beginning. 3 days after Marcus Chen's demonstration, the reverberations reached the highest echelons of galactic government. In the gleaming spires of the Galactic Council's headquarters on Nexus Prime, representatives from 17 major civilizations gathered in emergency session to discuss what many were beginning to call the human question. The council chamber was a marvel of architectural cooperation, designed to accommodate the diverse physiological needs of species that had evolved under radically different conditions. Gravity fields shifted smoothly between sections, atmospheric compositions varied by zone, and the lighting spectrum adjusted continuously to provide optimal conditions for beings whose vision operated across different frequency ranges. High Chancellor Vexnari of the Alterian Federation called the session to order with a gesture of her 4 arms, each ending in delicate manipulator appendages that had evolved for precision work in their homeworld's low gravity. The Alterians had served as neutral mediators in galactic politics for over 3 centuries, their reputation for analytical thinking and diplomatic skill making them natural choices for leadership positions. Honored representatives, Chancellor Vexnari began, her voice carrying the harmonic undertones that gave Alterian speech its distinctive musical quality. We convene this emergency session to address intelligence reports concerning human military doctrine and its potential implications for galactic security. The chamber stirred with the subtle movements of beings preparing for serious discussion. Admiral Thekvar's report from the Military Academy had been circulated to all member worlds, along with additional analysis from intelligence services across the galaxy. What had started as an academic curiosity had quickly evolved into a matter of strategic importance. Representative Zekthal of the Ravager clans rose from his section of the chamber, his predatory form radiating the controlled aggression that had made his species feared throughout the galaxy. The Ravagers were warriors by nature and tradition, their entire civilization organized around concepts of strength, honor, and military prowess. Chancellor, Zekthal said, his voice carrying the growling undertones typical of his species, the Ravager clans questioned the wisdom of calling an emergency session over the military capabilities of a single species that achieved interstellar flight less than 50 standard years ago. His statement was met with various forms of agreement from several representatives. The Ravager perspective was shared by many species who viewed humans as technologically primitive newcomers to galactic civilization. However, Zekthal continued, raising one clawed hand to forestall interruption. Recent encounters with human mercenary forces have provided data that supports the Academy's analysis. Human tactical thinking appears to operate outside established parameters for military engagement. The admission carried significant weight coming from the Ravager clans, whose warrior culture placed enormous value on understanding enemy capabilities. If the Ravagers acknowledged unusual aspects of human military thinking, other species would take notice. Supreme Coordinator Kilvesh of the Nexus Collective activated their communication systems, status indicators along their chrome chassis displaying the complex patterns associated with high-level analysis. The collective has completed preliminary modeling of human tactical doctrine based on available historical data. Results indicate significant deviation from standard galactic military principles. The coordinator's mechanical voice carried perfect clarity as they continued their report. Standard galactic warfare follows predictable patterns, technological superiority determines tactical advantages, resource allocation follows logical optimization protocols, and strategic objectives align with measurable benefits. Human military history demonstrates consistent violation of these principles. Chancellor Vexnari gestured for the coordinator to continue, her harmonic voice carrying notes of curiosity. Specify the nature of these violations. Example Alpha, the Battle of Stalingrad, Earth year 1942 to 1943. Human forces defended an urban position of minimal strategic value, accepting enormous casualties to maintain control. Logical analysis suggested evacuation and regroupment would optimize resource preservation. Instead, humans weaponized their own suffering, creating propaganda value that motivated civilian populations to increase war production and military recruitment. The collective's analysis continued with mechanical precision. Example beta, the Tet Offensive, Earth year 1968. Technologically inferior forces launched coordinated attacks against superior enemy positions with minimal probability of tactical success. However, the psychological impact of perceived vulnerability created strategic advantage that exceeded material gains. Representative Morthak of the crystalline hierarchies resonated at frequencies that indicated deep concern. The crystalline beings communicated through harmonic vibrations that could carry complex emotional and analytical content, making their species excellent at detecting subtle implications in data. The collective's analysis suggests that humans weaponize psychological factors in ways that other species do not, Morthak harmonized. This creates unpredictability in conflict resolution protocols. Unpredictability that has proven profitable, added Representative Solera of the Merchant Guilds, her practical focus on economic implications cutting through the theoretical discussion. Human mercenary forces command premium rates throughout the galaxy. Supply and demand indicates perceived value that exceeds technological capabilities. The merchant guilds maintain the most extensive database of military contractor performance throughout the galaxy, making their perspective particularly relevant to the discussion. Solera's species, the Tellurians, had evolved as traders and negotiators, giving them unique insights into the practical applications of military power. Recent contract analyses show human forces achieving success rates of 87% in defensive operations and 73% in offensive operations, despite technological disadvantages in 81% of engagements, Solera reported. These statistics suggest capabilities that exceed apparent resources. Chancellor Vexnari's harmonics shifted to frequencies associated with synthesis and analysis. Representative Solera raises important points about practical implications. However, we must also consider the broader strategic picture. Admiral Thekvar, please share your assessment of the Academy incident. Admiral Thekvar rose with mechanical precision, their optical sensors adjusting to optimal focus for addressing the full chamber. The incident at the military academy revealed fundamental assumptions about human military doctrine that require reassessment. The human student demonstrated weapon construction from improvised materials, but, more significantly, he articulated a philosophy of warfare that operates outside standard paradigms. The Admiral's status indicators shifted to patterns associated with high-priority intelligence briefings. Human military doctrine appears to reject the concept of hopeless situations. Where other species might calculate probability of failure and withdraw resources for more effective deployment, humans appear to seek methods for altering the parameters of conflict itself. Elaborate, requested Representative Kethmore of the Hegemony, whose species prided themselves on logical analysis and strategic planning. Example, when faced with superior enemy forces, standard doctrine suggests retreat, regroupment, and engagement under more favorable conditions. Human doctrine suggests seeking methods to negate enemy advantages through environmental manipulation, psychological warfare, or alteration of engagement terms. Admiral Thekvar paused as their systems processed additional data streams. The human student specifically mentioned the willingness to weaponize weakness itself to turn disadvantageous situations into tactical advantages through creative application of available resources. The chamber fell silent as representatives contemplated these concepts. The idea of deliberately turning weaknesses into strengths was alien to most species' military thinking, which generally focused on maximizing advantages while minimizing vulnerabilities. Representative Zekthal's growl carried notes of grudging respect. The Ravager clans have encountered this phenomenon in recent conflicts. Human mercenary units have demonstrated ability to achieve victory through methods that our tactical analysis classified as impossible. Specify, Chancellor Vexnari requested. 6 standard months ago, Ravager forces were contracted to suppress rebellion on Kepler 442b. Standard operation, technological superiority, overwhelming force, rapid conclusion. However, rebel forces included human advisors who transformed the conflict into extended guerrilla warfare using indigenous materials and terrain features. Zekthal's predatory features shifted in what might have been the equivalent of a grimace. Humans taught rebels to weaponize the planet's unstable geological activity, creating tactical advantages from environmental hazards that Ravager doctrine classified as obstacles to be avoided. Outcome, inquired Supreme Coordinator Kilvesh. Contract termination. Cost-benefit analysis indicated continued engagement would exceed profit margins. Rebels achieved strategic victory through economic attrition rather than military defeat. The admission carried significant weight throughout the chamber. The Ravager clans rarely acknowledged tactical defeats, and their military reputation made any admission of failure noteworthy. Representative Lythara of the Scientific Consortium activated her communication devices, her insectoid form clicking with the rapid movements associated with excited analysis. The consortium has been monitoring human technological development since first contact. Our assessment focused on innovation rates, industrial capacity, and scientific advancement. This analysis may be incomplete. The Scientific Consortium maintained the galaxy's most comprehensive databases on technological development, making their perspective essential for understanding the implications of human capabilities. Human technological advancement follows unusual patterns, Lythara continued. Rather than specializing in particular areas of excellence, humans pursue parallel development across multiple technological domains. This creates inefficiency in individual technologies but provides broad-spectrum capabilities. Her clicking accelerated as she accessed additional data streams. More significantly, humans consistently repurpose existing technologies for military applications that were not considered during original development. The consortium has identified 67 instances of civilian technologies being converted to military use through creative application. Examples? Chancellor Vexnari requested. Chemical fertilizers converted to explosive devices. Communications satellites repurposed for surveillance operations. Industrial robots modified for combat applications. In each case, the conversion utilized existing technological capabilities in ways that original designers never anticipated. Supreme Coordinator Kilvesh's status indicators flickered as the collective processed this information. This suggests that human military capability cannot be accurately assessed through analysis of dedicated military technologies alone. Entire civilian infrastructure represents potential military resources. The implications hung in the chamber's carefully controlled atmosphere like an unspoken challenge. If humans could weaponize their civilian infrastructure, then traditional assessments of military strength became meaningless. Representative Velnath of the Pacifist Alliance raised concerns from a different perspective. The alliance represented species that had evolved beyond violent conflict resolution, making their viewpoint particularly relevant to discussions of military doctrine. The alliance expresses concern about the escalatory potential of human military philosophy, Velnath communicated through harmonic patterns that conveyed deep unease. If humans refuse to accept defeat and consistently seek to alter conflict parameters, what mechanisms exist for conflict resolution? The question touched on one of the fundamental assumptions underlying galactic civilization, that rational beings would eventually reach negotiated settlements when continued conflict became irrational. If humans operated outside these parameters, traditional diplomatic mechanisms might prove inadequate. Historical analysis suggests humans do engage in diplomatic resolution, Admiral Thekvar reported. However, their negotiation patterns differ significantly from galactic norms. How so? Chancellor Vexnari inquired. Human diplomacy appears to operate under assumption that negotiation occurs from position of strength or preparation to create such position. Rather than seeking mutually beneficial compromise, humans appear to seek agreements that provide advantage while maintaining capability for renewed conflict if agreements prove unsatisfactory. Representative Morthak's harmonic resonance shifted to frequencies associated with analytical insight. This explains the success of human mercenary forces in conflict resolution operations. Other species seek to minimize conflict through balanced settlements. Humans seek to create conditions where conflict resolution favors their employers. The discussion was beginning to reveal fundamental differences between human approaches to conflict and the methods that had maintained galactic stability for centuries. These differences had implications that extended far beyond military applications. Chancellor Vexnari called for a brief recess to allow representatives to consult with their home governments and analyze the implications of the discussion so far. As the chamber emptied temporarily, small groups formed to discuss the revelations in more detail. The Ravager and Nexus collective representatives found themselves in unexpected agreement about the need to reassess human capabilities. The Scientific Consortium and merchant guilds compared data on human technological applications and economic impact. The Pacifist Alliance consulted among themselves about the implications for galactic stability. When the session reconvened, the atmosphere had shifted noticeably. What had begun as academic curiosity about a minor incident at the military academy had evolved into recognition that humanity might represent a more significant factor in galactic affairs than anyone had previously realized. Honored representatives, Chancellor Vexnari announced as the session resumed, preliminary consultations with member governments indicate broad consensus that human military capabilities require further analysis. However, we must also consider the practical implications of this analysis. Representative Celera of the Merchant Guilds addressed the chamber with characteristic directness. The practical reality is that human mercenary forces are already integrated into military operations throughout the galaxy.
17% of current conflicts involve human contractors in some capacity.
Any changes to their status or capabilities assessment will have immediate economic and strategic implications. Supreme Coordinator Kilvesh confirmed this assessment with additional data. Current contracts involving human forces total approximately 47 billion standard credits annually. Disruption of these arrangements would affect military operations on 43 worlds. The economic implications were staggering. Humanity had become integrated into galactic military operations to an extent that few had realized, creating dependencies that would be difficult to alter without significant disruption. Representative Zekthal growled with what might have been grim humor. The Ravager clans face choice: continue employing human forces despite tactical unpredictability, or sacrifice operational effectiveness for strategic certainty.
Neither option is satisfactory.
Perhaps, suggested Representative Lythera, the solution lies not in limiting human involvement but in better understanding human capabilities.
The scientific consortium proposes expanded research into human military doctrine and its applications. Chancellor Vexnari's harmonics indicated consideration of multiple complex factors.
The consortium's proposal has merit.
However, such research would require human cooperation, which introduces additional variables into the analysis. Admiral Thekvar provided relevant information about human attitudes toward such cooperation.
Initial discussions with human representatives suggest willingness to participate in expanded military cooperation and doctrinal sharing.
However, humans appear to view such cooperation as mutually beneficial rather than one-sided analysis.
Meaning they expect to learn our capabilities while sharing their own. Representative Morthak resonated with notes of concern.
Affirmative.
Human representatives express interest in galactic military technologies and doctrines. They appear to view military cooperation as opportunity for mutual enhancement rather than simple sharing of information.
The implications were profound.
If humans were willing to share their military innovations in exchange for access to galactic military technologies, the result could be unprecedented advancement in warfare capabilities throughout the galaxy.
Representative Velnetha's harmonic patterns conveyed deep unease.
The Alliance must express concern about escalatory potential of enhanced military cooperation. If human adaptability is combined with galactic technological superiority, results could destabilize existing strategic balance.
Alternatively, Representative Celera countered, enhanced cooperation could create new opportunities for conflict resolution through superior deterrent capabilities.
The debate that followed revealed the fundamental tension underlying the entire discussion. Humanity represented both an opportunity and a threat to existing galactic order, and the choice of how to respond would shape the future of galactic civilization. As the emergency session drew to a close, Chancellor Vexnari summarized the consensus that had emerged from the day's discussions. The Council acknowledges that human military capabilities require reassessment and that current understanding may be inadequate for strategic planning purposes. She paused, allowing her words to resonate through the chamber's various atmospheric zones. Therefore, the Council authorizes establishment of a joint commission to study human military doctrine and its implications for galactic security. This commission will include representatives from major military powers, scientific organizations, and diplomatic corps. The decision was historic, marking the first time in galactic history that an entire species' military capabilities had been subjected to systematic analysis by the full Council. The implications would extend far beyond academic research, potentially reshaping how humanity was perceived and treated throughout the galaxy. As representatives began to file out of the chamber, many were already contemplating the challenges and opportunities that lay ahead. The human question had moved from academic curiosity to strategic priority in the span of a single emergency session. Meanwhile, in a modest dormitory room at the Galactic Military Academy, Marcus Chen studied for his next day's classes, unaware that his simple demonstration with a bow and arrow had just changed the course of galactic history. 2 weeks after the Emergency Council session, the newly formed Joint Commission on Human Military Doctrine convened its first formal meeting at the Galactic Strategic Studies Institute on Kepler 438b. The facility had been chosen for its neutral location and its reputation as the galaxy's premier center for military research and analysis. Marcus Chen found himself transported from his student life at the Academy to the center of galactic attention as the primary human representative on the commission. The responsibility was overwhelming, but he had been chosen specifically because his Academy demonstration had sparked the entire investigation. Human military leadership felt that the commission needed someone who could articulate the intuitive aspects of human thinking that their professional officers might take for granted. The commission included some of the most brilliant military minds in the galaxy. General Korthak of the Krillian Empire brought centuries of experience in large-scale warfare. Admiral Velnix of the Zephyrian Confederacy represented the galaxy's most advanced energy-based weapons technology. Dr. Yathera from the Scientific Consortium provided analytical expertise in weapons development. Supreme Tactical Coordinator Nexus 7 represented the collective military knowledge of the Nexus Collective. The meeting facility itself was a marvel of engineering designed to accommodate the diverse needs of species that had evolved under radically different conditions. Gravity fields, atmospheric compositions, and environmental controls adjusted seamlessly to provide optimal conditions for each participant. The main conference chamber featured holographic displays capable of rendering information in formats suitable for beings whose sensory capabilities spanned electromagnetic spectra from radio waves to gamma radiation. Commission Chairwoman Admiral Seftala of the Altarian Federation called the first session to order with characteristic diplomatic precision. Her species' reputation for neutral analysis had made her the natural choice to lead an investigation that could have significant implications for galactic military balance. Honored colleagues, Admiral Seftala began, her harmonic voice carrying the formal tones appropriate for historic occasions. We convene this commission to investigate human military doctrine and assess its implications for galactic security. Our mandate includes analysis of human tactical thinking, strategic planning, and operational capabilities. She gestured toward Marcus with two of her forearms. Representative Chen will provide insights into human military philosophy, while commission members contribute expertise from their respective specializations. Marcus stood, acutely aware that every being in the room possessed military experience and analytical capabilities that far exceeded his own. However, he also understood that they had specifically requested his perspective because it represented something they couldn't replicate through analysis alone. "Thank you, Admiral," Marcus said, his voice steadier than he felt. "Before we begin, I should clarify something important. Human military doctrine isn't a single, unified system. Different human cultures, nations, and organizations have developed different approaches to warfare based on their unique historical experiences and geographical constraints." Dr. Yathera's insectoid form clicked with analytical interest. "Elaborate on these variations." "Well, for example, island nations like Britain and Japan developed naval traditions and amphibious warfare capabilities out of necessity. Continental powers like Russia and China emphasized land-based operations and logistics over vast distances. Mountain peoples like the Swiss and Afghans specialized in defensive operations using terrain advantages." Marcus activated the chamber's holographic display system, calling up a three-dimensional map of Earth showing various geographical regions. Each environment produced different military innovations. Desert warfare, jungle operations, Arctic combat, urban fighting. Humans developed specialized techniques for every possible operating environment. Supreme Tactical Coordinator Nexus 7's optical sensors focused with mechanical precision. This suggests inefficient resource allocation. Logical military development would identify optimal approaches and standardize implementation. "From your perspective, yes," Marcus replied. "But, from a human perspective, this diversity is a strength. It means that somewhere in human military history, someone has probably faced whatever situation you're dealing with and developed techniques for handling it." General Korthak's massive frame shifted as he considered this concept. "Provide specific examples of environmental adaptation." Marcus called up additional displays showing various historical conflicts. The Finnish resistance during the Winter War of 1939 to 1940 developed techniques for fighting in extreme cold that included specialized equipment, tactics for using snow and ice as weapons, and psychological warfare adapted to winter conditions. The display shifted to show jungle environments. Vietnamese forces during the American conflict developed tunnel systems, booby trap techniques, and supply methods specifically adapted to tropical jungle warfare. These innovations were later adopted by other forces operating in similar environments. Admiral Velnix's energy form flickered with curiosity. These adaptations suggest reactive rather than proactive development. Do humans not develop standardized solutions for anticipated challenges? We do both, Marcus replied. But human military thinking emphasizes adaptability over standardization. We'd rather have soldiers who can figure out solutions to unexpected problems than soldiers who are perfectly trained for predictable situations. Dr. Yithara accessed additional data streams, her clicking accelerating with analytical excitement. The consortium has analyzed human military training programs. Results indicate significant emphasis on improvisation and creative problem solving compared to other species' training protocols. That's correct, Marcus confirmed. Human military training includes scenarios designed to force soldiers to adapt when their standard equipment fails, when their communications are cut, when their support systems are unavailable. We specifically train for Murphy's Law. Define Murphy's Law, requested Nexus 7. Anything that can go wrong, will go wrong, Marcus quoted. It's a fundamental principle of human military planning. We assume that our equipment will malfunction, our intelligence will be incomplete, our communications will fail, and our enemies will do things we don't expect. The commission members exchanged glances, recognizing implications they hadn't previously considered. Most galactic military doctrine assumed that technological systems would function as designed and that conflicts would proceed according to predictable parameters. Admiral Seftala's harmonics shifted to frequencies associated with synthesis of complex information. This suggests that human military effectiveness derives not from superior technology or tactics, but from superior preparation for system failures. Partly, yes, Marcus agreed. But it goes deeper than that. Human military philosophy assumes that the enemy is also intelligent, adaptive, and creative. We plan based on the assumption that our opponents will figure out counters to our tactics, that they'll exploit our weaknesses, and that they'll do things we haven't anticipated. General Korthak's gravelly voice carried notes of grudging respect. This explains human mercenary effectiveness in asymmetric conflicts. Standard galactic doctrine assumes technological superiority will determine outcomes. Humans plan for situations where technological advantages may be negated. Marcus nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. In human military thinking, technological superiority is an advantage, not a guarantee. We always ask, what happens if this doesn't work, and what will we do if they find a way around this? The discussion was interrupted by the arrival of additional data packages from various galactic intelligence services. Dr. Yithara's compound eyes tracked multiple information streams simultaneously as she processed the incoming analysis. Fascinating, she clicked. Intelligence reports from 17 different conflicts involving human forces show consistent patterns of adaptation and improvisation. In 73% of cases, human forces modified their tactics during active operations based on enemy responses. Supreme Tactical Coordinator Nexus 7's processing indicators flickered rapidly. Tactical modification during active operations introduces chaos into strategic planning. Predictive models cannot account for real-time doctrinal changes. That's the point, Marcus replied. You can't predict what we're going to do because we don't know what we're going to do until we see what you're going to do. The statement created a moment of profound silence in the chamber as commission members contemplated the implications. Military planning throughout the galaxy was based on predictive modeling and strategic calculation. The idea of deliberately maintaining tactical uncertainty was alien to most species' thinking. Admiral Velnix's energy form stabilized as he focused intently on Marcus. But this creates inefficiency in resource allocation and command structure coordination. In the short term, yes, Marcus acknowledged. But in the long term, it creates resilience. Human military units can continue operating effectively even when they're cut off from command, even when their original mission parameters become irrelevant, even when they face situations that nobody anticipated. Dr. Yithara brought up holographic displays showing organizational charts for various military forces. Analysis confirms that human military structures incorporate more autonomous decision-making at lower levels than equivalent galactic forces. This enables rapid adaptation but complicates coordination. It's a trade-off, Marcus explained.
We sacrifice some efficiency in normal operations to gain effectiveness in abnormal situations. And, in our experience, real combat situations are almost always abnormal. Admiral Seftala called for a recess to allow Commission members to process the information and consult with their respective governments. During the break, informal discussions revealed the growing consensus that human military thinking represented a fundamentally different approach to warfare than anything previously encountered in galactic civilization. When the session reconvened, the focus shifted to specific examples of human military innovation and its applications in galactic conflicts. Marcus had prepared case studies from recent operations involving human mercenary forces, demonstrating how human tactical thinking had influenced outcomes in various scenarios. The Kepler 442b rebellion that Representative Zekfel mentioned during the council session provides an excellent example of human tactical adaptation, Marcus began, calling up detailed operational data on the holographic displays. The situation involved a technologically superior force attempting to suppress a rebellion using standard galactic tactics, overwhelming firepower, rapid deployment, and technological advantage. These tactics had proven successful in dozens of similar operations. The display showed the planet's geography, highlighting the unstable geological formations that characterized much of the inhabited region. Human advisors recognized that the planet's geological instability, which both sides had classified as an obstacle to military operations, could actually be weaponized. General Korthak leaned forward with interest. Explain the weaponization process. The rebels, guided by human tactical thinking, began using seismic charges to trigger controlled geological events. Rather than trying to match the superior force's firepower, they used the planet itself as a weapon. Marcus manipulated the display to show the progression of the conflict. Each engagement was designed to force the superior force into areas where geological instability could be exploited. The rebels weren't trying to win direct confrontations, they were trying to make every engagement occur on terms that favored their capabilities rather than their opponents. Dr. Ythera's analytical processors whirred with excitement. This demonstrates weaponization of environmental factors that military doctrine typically classifies as neutral obstacles. Correct, Marcus confirmed. But, more importantly, it demonstrates the human approach to asymmetric warfare. When you can't match your opponent's strengths, you change the game so that their strengths become irrelevant. Admiral Velnix asked the question that was on everyone's mind. What are the limitations of this approach? Surely there must be situations where adaptation and improvisation are insufficient. Marcus considered his response carefully. There are definitely limitations. Human tactics work best in complex, chaotic situations where there are multiple variables to manipulate. In simple, direct confrontations with overwhelming force disparities, adaptation has limits. He called up additional data showing conflicts where human forces had been decisively defeated. The key limitation is that human tactics require time and space to develop. If you can impose simple, direct confrontation with sufficient force superiority, human adaptability becomes irrelevant. Supreme Tactical Coordinator Nexus 7's optical sensors focused precisely on Marcus. Specify tactical recommendations for neutralizing human adaptive advantages. The question created tension in the room, as Commission members realized they were discussing how to defeat the very forces they were studying. Marcus felt the weight of representing not just human military doctrine, but human survival in galactic conflicts. The most effective approach would be to eliminate the variables that humans exploit, Marcus said carefully. Simple, direct engagement with overwhelming technological superiory.